Hello, good morning, Sitaram, and welcome to another program in the series Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ram Naresh Dwarika, as usual on a Thursday morning, joining you, all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, up the islands, and worldwide, wherever you are listening to this program. And to let you know, this program is being recorded and it will be posted on Facebook and YouTube as soon as its completion this morning. So those of you who can't stay for the entire program, you can come back and listen to it at your convenience. And you may also send a link to someone who you believe can benefit from the contents of the program. You know, this program this morning, we have been looking at various intervention methods in the past. We have looked at all aspects of addiction to social media, to alcohol, to cocaine, to marijuana. And I know you all our brothers there listening and sisters listening there to this program often wonder, well, what works and why and how it works. And this morning, I'm going to get into the nut and bolts of it, the actual details. In my experience of working in the field of alcoholism and drug addiction, I've worked at Cora Hospital, at the Barrow Empowerment Center, Ward 1, and in private practice as well. I've had training in the United States, looking at the programs there at Daytop International. And I have a very good sense. I've even had the opportunity of visiting natural methods for recovery. I actually experienced the North American Native detox program. You know, they do a detox program where you sit in a tent with steam and all of that. And yes, various methods work because human beings, we are different. What may work for you may not work for me. And I have come across a lot of people who would, you know, with pride, exclaim that, look, they have been able to stop on their own without going for treatment or going to Alcoholics Anonymous. After some incident, the incident maybe was so profound that it triggered a lot of these people who have been drinking, and I speak from personal experience, would have for many years realized long before that, look, they need to do something about their drinking and would have secretly tried all kinds of things. I remember trying, setting dates. I wouldn't have anything to drink until my birthday or until this function or, until the prayers is complete and would struggle to keep those decisions. And sometimes would relapse actually before I could complete the promise. And then I would promise parents and all of that and fail to keep the promise. And what would happen eventually is stop promising yourself or anybody because you realize, you know, deep down that, look, I can't stop. And then you start rationalizing, you know, finding reasons for why you should continue or you could continue to drink. Like I would say, I don't play cricket, I don't play football, I don't gamble. So if I take a few drinks, what's wrong with that? And that worked for me. And then I have worked in the field. I worked in substance abuse prevention and treatment in Trinidad, abroad. And I have seen the various intervention methods. And I have come to realize, you know, after all of this, what is it really works? And the truth of it, the bottom line is that Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step program that was developed by AA way back in the 1930s, continue to be the most successful program in the world today. It can be found in almost every country in the world. And there are no barriers to recovery using this program. It doesn't matter whatever ethnicity you are, whatever religious following you belong to, or not, don't belong to either. Atheists and agnostics as well have found that they could get help using these 12-step programs. And if you look at the literature in the 12-step and 12 traditions booklet, It also says that there are people who are not alcoholics, who are not addicted to any substances, who have found these 12 steps very useful in helping them to overcome some of life's other problems as well, dependencies and addictions and so on. So today I want to discuss one of the most remarkable recovery programs ever developed, the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, although it was created in 1935 by Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith, modern medicine, psychology, and even neuroscience have increasingly recognized that its success lies in something very important. And the 12 steps do not merely help people to stop drinking, they help people to rebuild the entire human being. So today I will explain how the 12 steps address what health professionals call the biopsychosocial spiritual model of recovery. Now, as human beings, we are biopsychosocial spiritual beings. Most of us, that is the majority of us, believe we have bones and muscles. The bio means we have bones and muscles and organs. And we also have, we are psychological beings. We have a mind, we have emotions, we have feelings, you know, and then we are also social beings. Human beings, we live in groups, and our relationships do matter to us. And of course, most people believe in some higher power of some sort, a God or the universe or some other entity outside of them. So that this is one of the reasons our traditional methods have been failing. Because medicine, I worked in all the hospitals in Trinidad, and medicine basically deals with the biological human being, the bones, muscles, and organs. And yes, when we are using drugs and we have come to chronic use and so on, the body suffers the brunt of the effects of the drug, from neglect, from malnutrition, from abuse, and all of that. So that it is critical that we have a medical evaluation and medical support to sustain and repair the body and so on. But this addiction is a disease that not only affects the biological person, it also affects the psychological being in terms of affecting one's self-esteem, affecting their coping skills, the way they process things, you know. Some people even start using it to medicate themselves for against depression and anxiety, so that that aspect, the psychological self, also has to be addressed in any intervention plan. Any treatment model that will have any chance of being successful must consider all four areas. Then the social being must be addressed, the family, the relationship on the workplace, in the community. These matter very much because in addiction, a lot of damage is done to the relationships in the house, with the spouse, with the children, with the siblings, even with the community members and so on. So these will have to be addressed. And then, of course, there is that spiritual entity, that consideration that there is a God, or a higher being that is in control. And some people will tell you that, in fact, one of the books says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and everything else will be added unto you. In fact, you'd hear in Alcoholics Anonymous that almost every person who goes up there to testify would say their name and they will say, but for the grace of God that they are sober. Because the obsession that is addiction, it is strongly believed that without God's assistance or help, you can't really stop that gnawing obsession that is even when you're not using, you're thinking about it, you know. You're obsessed with it. And a person who's addicted will be able to relate to what I'm saying. So coming back, the the medical model has not been very successful. Even psychotherapy by itself has not succeeded. Neither counseling or not even going to temples or church. But when combined, all these methods in a treatment plan, which is really encapsulated in the 12-step program, as we will see as we discussed this morning. So that, as I said before, human beings, we are biological, psychological, and social and spiritual beings. When addiction develops, every one of these dimensions becomes damaged. Now, this is the only disease, unlike diarrhea and all the other things, it affects every area of the person's life, the biological, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual. So that is why lasting recovery requires healing every one of these four areas. Now, let us first look at the biological dimension and how AA addresses the biological factors that precipitate and perpetuate alcoholism and drug addiction. Alcohol and drugs change the chemistry in the brain. That is a physiological thing. They interfere with dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and other neurotransmitters responsible for pleasure, motivation, and decision making. Now, over time, the brain becomes dependent upon the substance. This explains why addicted individuals continue using despite devastating consequences. The 12 steps begin by acknowledging this biological reality. So, in most treatment facilities, you'll have a medical evaluation and assessment done at screening just before admission to make that assessment. So that the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous, which reads, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Let me say at the outset, powerlessness here is not a sign of weakness. No, it is recognition that addiction is a disease affecting brain function. Now, this has been a struggle for the longest while, since the 1930s and even before that. Alcoholism and drug addiction has been seen traditionally as a moral issue, as a question of being deviant and, hardened and immoral and all of that, weak-willed. But today, thank God for the work of people like Professor Boburn and so on, the world has come, for the most part, accepting alcoholism and drug addiction as a disease. And so people are not fired now for being alcoholic or dismissed and so on. They are sent for treatment and help is available. So instead of trying to control drinking through willpower alone, the individual accepts that professional treatment, meetings, sponsorship, and lifelong recovery are necessary if they are ever going to succeed at dealing with this problem. Now, AA also encourages healthy biological recovery through regular sleep. Of course, once a person stops drinking, there are withdrawal symptoms. Insomnia is one of them. And the program encourages people now to eat, to have a balanced diet, to sleep properly, to exercise, to seek medical care, to avoid mood altering substances in the meantime, and to engage in activities that reduce stress levels. Many recovering persons discover that physical health gradually improves as sobriety continues. The body begins to heal. And that's one of the first things, when I'm working with new people, immediately after 1 week of staying sober, they come and they report, I'm now eating better, sleeping better, feeling better, and starting feeling stronger. Energy returns. They are able to concentrate more on their work. You know, sleep starts to become normalized. And recovery, literally with time, it changes the brain function from dependence to being self-reliant. You are able now to have full access to your brain, as it were. Of course, there are much more psychological benefits, that happens when a person stops drinking. They are much more attentive to their personal hygiene now. They are taking a bath regularly. They are dressing properly. They are engaging in less stressful activities. Now, let us briefly look at the psychological dimensions that that are affected and that are addressed in the 12-step program. Addiction is far more than drinking or drug use. Let me say that. Because drinking and drug use are only one of the symptoms of this disease. It is closely connected to thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and coping skills. So that many addicted individuals suffer from guilt, shame, anxiety, depression, anger, resentment, fear, and loneliness as well. So that the 12 steps systematically addresses these psychological wounds so that over time, especially where a person started using drugs at an early age, when you should have been learning how to resolve conflicts by dialogue and diplomacy, people call it these days. You're learning coping skills, how to accept losses and all of that, using healthy coping skills. As the person was introduced to drugs and continue to use it, they start using the drugs to help them to cope. And as a result, they never learn how to deal with life's problems. They don't develop the coping skills. Now, as we go through the steps, you'll see how the steps presents to the person in recovery methods now to cope with life's problems. They also discover the root causes of some of the problems that they're having, and they are able to prevent situations from happening, as we'll see later on, that will cause guilt and shame and all of that. Now, there is, of course, step 4 and 5. These involve a searching and fearless moral inventory, followed by admitting one's wrongs. Now, this process resembles modern psychological therapy. Being a psychotherapist myself, I can tell you, one of the things you give people a chance to ventilate and be able to accept what has happened, the reality of their life. And instead of suppressing painful emotions, individuals are allowed to ventilate them and examine them honestly so that hidden guilt loses its power once it is brought into the light. So that it is probably the first time or in a long time where an alcoholic or an addict in recovery looks at themselves with a sober head now and become willing to accept responsibility for what they have done in the past, by writing down the good things about yourself. That will help to boost your self-esteem because you've been criticized so many times that you actually believe that you're no good. So you're encouraged to go and look at, okay, but I was helpful. I used to do this. I helped that friend. And you look at the good things about yourself and you also look at the bad things. And then you look deeper with the help of a sponsor into why you did those bad things. And you would see a lot of times the bad things that you did to others and so on had to do with your anger, your ego, your feeling of shame and guilt, your sexuality, and you are able to actually diagnose yourself, assisted by your sponsor in the program, to see what in you triggers these things, and you become aware, well, what you need to deal with, what you need to avoid in the future, so that hidden These steps encourage willingness to change unhealthy character traits. That is, after step five, you have step six and seven, where recovery is not merely stopping drinking. You are actually willing now. It is becoming a better human being. Have the opportunity of becoming a better human being. That's not stopping drinking, the person you always wanted to be. So that in step four and five, you would have identified your assets and liabilities, as it were. I was saying to a patient not too long ago that, when you stop drinking, it's like your life was like a business. And when you were drinking, it reached to the point where it bust down. So now, if you were going to start back this business of life, you have to take stock. And when you're taking stock, you have to look at your assets and your liabilities in any business. If it were a shop, you will want to look at your bad and irretrievable debts and all of that, so that you will not buy those goods that were not selling or you couldn't make a profit. So too, you will not engage in behaviors that attracted stress to you and cause you to additionally feel guilty and ashamed and all of that. So that in step four and five, you would have identified, take responsibility for, and actually did some therapeutic ventilation in step five when you spoke about it. A lot of people who have done that step five in particular, you know, have have declared that, they felt lighter, they felt unburdened after they had done it because they were carrying these feelings of guilt and shame for so long in their Pandora box. Now, in addition, in step six, where you become willing to have God help you to remove your defects of character and you start practicing a little more humility so that you start replacing selfishness with generosity, you start replacing fear with courage, because it took a lot of courage for you to stop, and now to critically look at yourself under the microscope. That would have taken a lot of courage. And out of that, the fact that you were able to admit to God yourself, another human being, is a very humbling proposition. It is really ego deflating. So that prepares you for the next two steps, that is six and seven, to deal with now your defects of character that you have identified. And you also are now armed with the humility to literally be able to do it. So you replace anger with forgiveness. You replace dishonesty with honesty. Now, we all have this two sides to ourselves. And even though a person stopped, this will not happen overnight. This will not, it, it took time to get sick, alcoholic or addicted. And it will also take time for a person to heal as well. Now, there's steps eight and nine, making amends, which reduces guilt and restores self respect. Research consistently shows that unresolved guilt contributes to relapse. So, a lot of people I know, they stop, they put down the glass, they use the formula to stop using drugs. That is, the formula is you avoid that first drink one day at a time, you stay away from people, places, and situations where the drug is available. And that in itself can help you remain abstinent. But as I said earlier on, drinking and drug use is only one of the symptoms. The other symptoms is the guilt, the fear, the ego, the anxiety, the depression. All of those things still persist because you never learned how to deal with it while you were using. And now, this is why it is important to have a sponsor and have people around you who are supportive, to attend meetings regularly so you learn as quickly as possible and you get the literature and you read it, so that by working these steps, individual experience improve self-esteem, emotional regulation, and healthier thinking patterns. So that, think about it for a little while. Now you stop lying, you're starting to be honest. Somebody rubbed you the wrong way, you're learning to forgive. You're also learning to say, look, I'm sorry when you were wrong. Think about that for a minute. If a person is able to do this, you know, as we will see in the other two steps, where you continue to take a personal inventory, and when you're wrong, you promptly admit it. In step 8, you would have made a list of all the person you had harmed and became willing to make amends to them, which means in actually making the list, you are now, for the first time, taking responsibility for your part in the conflict, or the quarrel, or whatever happened, and always become willing to clean your side of the street. Even if the other person was wrong and provoked the situation, if you realize you were wrong as well, you were drawn into the conflict, and you misbehaved, or you cursed, or you whatever, you do your part. You make your amends. If the other person is in the program, they will realize that they need to make amends, because when we don't make amends, we literally carry these people in our brain, in our head. We go to sleep with them and we get up with them, and they probably not even aware of it. We give them free rent space in our heads if we don't forgive. And the truth is, there's a prayer that says, "Forgive us as we have forgiven those who trespass against us." And if you have never n- not forgiven others, you will never feel forgiven by God. So when we forgive someone, we're not really doing them a favor so much as we're doing ourselves a favor. We are really untying us to that event that will keep, if we don't make amends and deal with it, forgive and make amends, we will always be stuck there. So what happens? We human beings, we are social creatures, and addiction destroys relationships. Because, when a person using drugs, what are the other, you always have to be lying. When is where you went? Did you take the money? No, no, no. You always have to lie to cover up. And then you become abusive, inconsiderate, insensitive. You say things, you accuse people, then you fight, you get into trouble. So it literally destroys, especially the relationships in the home, so that the families suffer more than anybody else. And this is why it is said to be a family illness. Marriages collapse, employment is lost, trust, of course, because of the lying, the amount of times you said, "I'm going to stop," and you never did. And then you drink and you come home and say, "No, no, no, I didn't drink." And your mouth smelling of it. So that trust is not only important in recovery for the addiction, but in relationships as well. Isolation increases where you realize, well, after time you notice people who are using drugs, they start isolating. And recovery requires rebuilding social connections. If you're going to live in that home and in that community again, you have to be able and become willing to rebuild, so that meetings literally create a safe community where members understand one another without judgment. And that's the strong thing about AA meetings, people who belong to the fellowship. It is generally non-judgmental, and people who are there for all for the same reason. Status doesn't make a difference. Everybody's equal in AA. So that isolation is replaced by belonging. You belong to a group, you start belonging to your family, you start getting involved in the community, in activities in your community, and so on. And people start recognizing all of a sudden this guy who used to be drunk and sleeping and unkempt and sleeping by the shop and cussing and pelting people's house and so on every day in the courthouse is now coming to the temple all dressed up nice on a Sunday with the family, or he's going to church, Bible in his hand with his suit and all of that. And people take notice. And this is why one of the traditions of AA is not so much on promoting AA, but it's based on attraction, because people see, the changes. They don't only you only talk it. They see that in the house now you're becoming helpful. You're going and washing the dishes, or you're pulling the weeds in the garden, or you're offering to help someone with a chore, things that you never did before. And these are what tells the family that you are changing. it improves the relationship. Now, sponsors usually provide a guidance because sponsors have lived, they walk that road already. They would have had some time in the fellowship practicing the principles, the program, and so they could provide actual guidance when it comes to the pitfalls and so on that you could expect in recovery, especially when members get involved in service work. This develops responsibilities. So as a member joins a group, eventually he's given a responsibility. Sometimes a lot of people start assisting in the coffee room, making coffee, making sandwiches, and so on. Some things that you never did at home. There are people I know who never made coffee for themselves until they came to AA. And then you become involved. There are other positions in Alcoholics Anonymous, like being the secretary of the group, being the chairperson at meetings, facilitating the meetings. Then there's also the treasurer holding usually one of the older members, senior members, the most trustworthy member is given that responsibility. And then what you find is becoming involved in service, literally. I remember a member saying, he was given the key. Most of these groups keep the literature and the paraphernalia in a little box in the schools where they have the meeting with a lock on it. And he just had the key for the lock. And he confessed that because he had that key, he had to come to the meeting to open the box. There were many, many times he did not feel like coming back. But because he had that responsibility, he came, and thank God he did. Eventually, he got the message and stayed sober. So that is why becoming involved in service sustains recovery. Because yes, it is challenging, because it is not very rewarding sometimes, people who are involved in service, sometimes you get a lot of flack and so on. And so that there's a slogan, that you can only keep what you have by giving it away. And that is literally true. That's one of the slogans in A. We that we keep what we have by giving it away. By trying to help other alcoholics and drug addicts to stay sober, it almost ensures you, the person who is trying to help, you know, stay sober. One of the founders said that when everything else had failed to keep him sober, intensive work with other alcoholics never failed. So that when recovering persons help others, they strengthen their own recovery. Healthy friendships replace unhealthy associations. Family relationships, they, they gradually improve with time. It takes time. And this is why in the big book of A, there's a whole chapter dedicated to the family afterwards, because sometimes the family as well need to get involved in recovery. So that there's Alcoholics Anonymous that use the 12-step program, but there's also Al Anon. That is, Al Anon is the family groups for people who are family of the alcoholic or drug addict. They go to Al Anon. And they also use these same 12 steps with a little modification. For instance, the alcoholic will, first step would read, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our life had become unmanageable. For Al Anon, theirs would read, we admitted we were powerless over the alcoholic. And because of our powerless over him, our life became unmanageable. Because they learn that you can't control the alcoholic. You're having trouble, so that it is important for the family as well to seek healing. Otherwise, it's like if you take a fish from a pond that was sick because the contents of the pond made him sick. You took him outside and you treated him and everything, and then you threw him back in the same pond. It's very likely he'll get back sick because sometimes families can generate so much stress, they become pathological that they can now perpetuate the addiction. However, when the person stops, family relationships do improve with time. Trust returns, Children often regain confidence in their parents, and employers begin trusting workers again. Recovery builds social capital. Gradually, with time, I have known employers who now will tell you that they would prefer a person in recovery. You know, they realize that these people can be trusted, that they are honest. If they made a mistake, they'll come forward and say, "Look, I'm sorry, I made a mistake," and they're willing to correct themselves. They also stand their ground, and they're people that eventually earn the respect of the workers around them. Now, let us look at the spiritual dimension a little bit. Perhaps the greatest contribution of AA is its emphasis on spirituality. Many people misunderstand spirituality. AA does not promote one religion. You know, in AA, you will find people of every color, creed, and race. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, even atheists and agnostics, they all tell you is by using this program, they have been able to stay sober. So that instead of AA encourages each person to develop a relationship with a higher power as they understand him. You get a chance to pray to a God of your understanding. And I've thought about it. I'm a Hindu, but I feel pretty certain that my concept of God will be different to, although it might be the same God we're talking about, but my perception of Krishna or Ram will be different to someone else's, depending on their relationship with their higher power. And so too, the person who is a Muslim, each one will have their own impressions of their God, and so too Christians. So for me, God is a personal choice, a personal perception, and will be different. So spiritually provides meaning, hope, and purpose for the individual now. The spiritual steps include step two, of course, where you come to believe in a power greater than yourself that could restore you to sanity. And step three, where you turn your will and life over to the care of God as you understood God. Now, as I said, a lot of people have described, at first they had difficulty, you know, coming to believe in a power because of the experiences they've had, while drinking. A lot of them would have even become very disenchanted with God because they felt, how that God will not listen to them and all of that. And then sometimes because of our ego, we turn our will, but sometimes we take it back every day, in certain situations, and we get ourselves into trouble. And then another spiritual step is step 11, where we sought through prayer and meditation to obtain that conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Now, I myself practice meditation. I've been doing this way back. I was introduced to formal meditation in 1992 when I became a teacher for the Art of Living Foundation. And I've practiced it since then. It is, in fact, for me, it is the single most important activity I do for the day. Because basically meditation is really giving the mind a rest. It has helped me to be able to focus on what I'm doing, what I'm saying. I'm able to look at everything that I do and think, is there a better way to do this? I'm also able now, even before I actually express my thoughts, I'm able to look at my mind, how it is working, and a lot of times capture the thoughts that could land me into trouble at the thought level instead of, expressing it or acting upon it. Because I don't have any control over the thoughts that come to my mind, but I have a choice whether I'm going to act upon it or not. And meditation has helped me to be less scatterbrained. My mind is not so tired now because it gets a little rest every day in meditation. And I'll maybe speak about that a little bit more. But meditation is the only method I know personally that has helped me to discover who I really am. that I'm not really this body, the spirit, the soul, the Atma that I am. I've been able to realize and identify that. And then, of course, there's step 12, which is involved in helping others. And, I personally believe that God has guided my life after drinking. When He sent me back to school, I was especially focused in working with addiction. When I studied in Jamaica, I did a research there on Alcoholics Anonymous in that country. And I've had a passion for this field even since I came back. And I worked in various treatment and rehab centers and so on. So my life has really been intertwined. Has become my passion. This program, I've been doing it since 1993 on various media houses every week. And this has been, well, I believe this is all God's will, you know, guiding me to work in these various settings and doing this program, and even helping me to develop the contents that I speak about here. And again, the whole purpose of all of this, I believe, my own personal view is that we are all supposed to be social workers, because helping others really should become, there's a little saying, a little nursery rhyme I heard in primary school that still stays with me. And it goes like this: the time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. The way to be happy is to make others happy. And we'll have a little heaven down here. And I have not found a more truer statement, a prescription for living than that little nursery rhyme, you know? So coming back, research has repeatedly shown that spirituality is associated with lower relapse rates. People who really get on the spiritual part of the program. Now, let me say this. To get to step 11 and step 12, you would have had to do from step 1 to step 10 to the best of your ability. Now, in AA, they claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. So that to really be able to sit in meditation in step 11, you would have had to clear your Pandora box in step 4 and 5. You would have had to make your amends and all of that, so that when you sit in meditation, you wouldn't have all these niggling little guilt feelings and outstanding amends and revenge and all of those things operating back. These are powerful emotions that are always going to steal your mind and will not allow you to sit and really be achieve that state where you can be blissful and peaceful. So that they have sufficient evidence that people who practice their spiritual aspects of the program, there's less likelihood to relapse. They develop greater resilience. There's reduced depression now because you don't have to run the world anymore. You hand it over back to God. The rainfall, He will see about that. Whatever. You just have now to see about what you have to see about. So it takes off all that stress and unnecessary anxiety and depression. And of course, you have increased hope because now you only have to think about today and not even the whole day. Just think about right now with the hope and and the knowledge and the experience that God is going to, God who brought you so far is not going to abandon you at this stage. So there's a stronger recovery outcomes for people who get involved in the spiritual aspects of the program. That is step 11 and 12, step 2 and 3 as well. The spiritual awakening described in step 12 often changes an individual's entire outlook on life. Instead of living selfishly, they begin living with gratitude, humility, and service. You know, gratitude, in fact, that should be one of the slogans in AA. I've heard a lot of people say gratitude should be your attitude. And for me, I have my own little slogans. Whenever I feel a little bit out of whack, stressed out or anything, I reach into my bag of gratitude. Meaning I look into all those things that I could be grateful for, you know, and immediately my mood changes. I realize, but wait, you know, it's just one or two things that are not working the way I would like. But look how many things I have going for me. So that is why I start my day with a prayer of gratitude. I thank God for the opportunity of seeing another day. Thank God for a roof over my head, a bed to get up from, hands and feet that working, eyes that can see. Thank God for the birds, for the air, for the trees, the plants, for the government, for the neighbor, for everybody I could think about. In fact, by the time I finish thanking God, I just feel like a big shot, you know? So instead of living selfishly today, you look for opportunity, any opportunity to do something good for someone, and you do it, not looking for reward. And, my orientation as a Hindu, we are supposed to be able to do things without looking for reward. Now, these qualities protect long-term recovery. And I dare say, because of practicing these, today I'm 42 years, 8 months, and 2 days without a drink sober. So that one of the remarkable feature of the 12 step is that each step affects several dimensions simultaneously. For example, step one deals with the biological. It also helps the person to accept the addiction as a disease. Now, that is one of the biggest and first challenges of staying sober. You see, a lot of people live in denial for many years of their alcoholism or drug addiction. And as a result, any psychologist or social worker will tell you, psychotherapist, that a problem is only one of definition. If the person doesn't accept they have a problem, they will not be willing to do anything about it. So step one is critical in helping the person to realize, hey, I have a problem and I need help. I can't handle it. That look, it is not a bad habit. It is a disease. I'm a sick person, not a bad person. It also helps step one breaks out of psychological denial. It also helps the person to reach out and ask and accept help. And it also introduces that spiritual component that helps a person to accept personal limitations, where you realize, look, there's only so much I could do. I need additional help. Then step four also deals with the psychological self-examination, looking at yourself. It also deals with recognizing harms done to others, which will help to rebuild your social relationships. It also has a spiritual component where, being honest with yourself and before God. And then step 8 and 9 also build on the psychological by reducing guilt, on the social by repairing relationships, on the spiritual by practicing humility. And then finally, step 12, assist again with the biological in terms of maintaining sobriety, the psychological in terms of building confidence, social by serving others now, reaching out and helping, and spiritual by living a meaningful life. So it's like, when you take a haircut, you don't have to tell anybody. If you're living the life, people see and they realize. In fact, some people say to you, you have a calm, a peaceful nature about you that they will really like to find out. Oh, you're always cool, quiet, helpful, all of that. This integration explains why 12 steps continue helping millions of people around the world after more than 90 years. That's how long AA has been around. So that whether someone is attending a rehabilitation center, counseling, or another recovery program, these four areas should always be addressed. So you need to ask yourself, am I taking care of my physical health? If you're in recovery, or if you're not in recovery, because you need to ask yourself, am I healing emotionally? Am I rebuilding healthy relationships? And am I growing spiritually? So, especially for people in recovery, these are critical questions. Recovery becomes stronger when all four dimensions developing together. You can't work on one and ignore the others. I know a lot of people will go to the doctor and they get put on sleeping pills and vitamins and all of that, and they stop for a little while and they think, or they go for treatment, stay for 6 weeks, stay sober and come out. Medicine patches them up and they think, well, okay, I'm good to go now. And then find in no time they relapse. So that in closing, I want to say that addiction damages the whole person, the bio, the psycho, the social, the spiritual. It harms the body, it disturbs the mind, it destroys the relationships, it weakens the spirit. So that the genius of the 12-step program is that it treats the whole human being. The biological dimension is addressed through abstinence, acceptance of addiction as a chronic illness, and healthy living. The psychological dimension is strengthened through self examination, honesty, emotional healing, and personal growth. The social dimension is restored through fellowship, sponsorship, service, and reconciliation. And the spiritual dimension is renewed through faith, hope, prayer, meditation, and helping others. Now, when these four dimensions work together, recovery becomes far more than simply stopping alcohol or drugs. It becomes a new way of life. So remember that recovery is possible no matter how severe the addiction. Millions of people have found freedom through the 12 steps and a commitment to personal change. So again, I want to thank you for joining me today. I encourage anyone struggling with alcohol or drug problems or anyone concerned about a loved one to seek help. Recovery is real, help is available, and a healthier, happier, and more meaningful life can begin one day at a time. So all you have to do is my number's on the screen. If you need further information, you can call me. I also want to thank the people at Radio and TV Jagriti for giving of their services, free airtime as a public service, as a corporate citizen. I want to thank the program planners and Jason Kalu, who schedules the program every week, Mr. Bhimal in the operating room there, and of course the CEO, Mr. Vijay Maharaj, for encouraging and supporting this program. And you, the listeners who have been sending your comments and your encouragement. Again, I want to remind you this program is going to be posted on YouTube and Facebook in a few minutes. So those of you who were not able to stay for the whole program or would like to send it as a link to someone to assist them, you can source it under my name, Ramnaresh Dwarika, Addiction and Recovery. It would be on Facebook and YouTube. So I want to thank you again for staying with me. And until next week, Thursday, have a safe and sober life. Thank you.